Brilliant, thank you. So welcome to this afternoon's webinar. So this is the latest webinar in our series of circular spotlight webinars, where we focus on different sectors, different elements of a circular economy. And so today's circular spotlight is focusing on the fashion and textile sector. And we've got two fantastic speakers joining us, who I will introduce shortly. Today, we're also co-hosting this webinar with the Future Fibres Network, which is a UKRI-funded network that aims to bring together different academics, industrial practitioners and government representatives across the area of fashion and textiles. So we've got a few members of that network joining us, which is fantastic. Really great to see you all. So just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. Please do keep your microphones on mute for the majority of the webinar. This webinar will be recorded and then it's going to be made available afterwards through our website. We're going to hear from our speakers who are going to present, and then there'll be time for question and answers after the presentation. So if you do have any questions for our speakers, please do either put them in the chat box while they're speaking, or feel free to come on and raise your hand at the end of the presentations, because it would be really great to see you and to hear from you. So one of the purposes of these webinars is to encourage dialogue and the sharing of experiences and approaches and resources. So please also do feel free to share any relevant anecdotes or tools or approaches that you've found to be effective and useful, again, either in the chat box as we go through, or feel free to comment afterwards. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Fiona Charnley. I'm a Professor of Circular Innovation at the University of Exeter in the Business School and co-director of our Exeter Centre for the Circular Economy. And I'm delighted to be joined today by two guest speakers. We first have Merryn Haines-Gadd, who is a Senior Specialist for Textiles at WRAP. And today Merryn's going to be talking to us about designing circular business models for fashion and outlining some of the key challenges and opportunities. And then we're also joined by Andrew Rough, who's Chief Executive Officer at ACS Clothing. And Andrew's going to be talking to us about how advanced clothing solutions are enabling the adoption of circular fashion solutions within the industry. So really looking forward to both of their presentations. And I think that's everything that I needed to say. And so I'll hand over to Merryn as our first speaker.
Sure, thanks, Fiona. Right, just share my screen. Right, all good?
Yes, perfect.
Right. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Merryn Haines-Gadd. I'm a Senior Specialist in Textiles at WRAP, and I lead the Circular Business Model workstream of our Textiles 2030 programme. And essentially what I do is we help support organisations within our network to design, test, scale, pilot their circular business models, and essentially really drive activity within this area so that we can be sort of implementing circular business models more comprehensively across the sector. I work at WRAP. If you don't know who WRAP are, we are a climate environmental NGO founded around 2000. Essentially, we work with governments, we work with industry bodies, we work with organizations, industry organizations, academics, basically anyone who is involved in the value chain in the production, consumption, disposal of goods. And we help them to improve the circularity and the sustainability of how they make stuff. And so we do that across a number of different material streams and sectors, such as energy and water, food, plastics, and I'm part of the textiles team. And what kind of really sets us apart as an environmental NGO is that we really use data and insights to drive the sort of strategic systems change that we're looking to facilitate in order to bring about the most positive impact for the environment. And some of the programs that we deliver, one in particular that I'm part of is the Textiles 2030 Voluntary Agreement. And this is essentially an ambitious 10-year agreement bringing together different textile leaders across the sector to come together and agree on making improvements for the fashion industry. And we have two key targets in the ways in which we're doing that. Firstly, it's cutting down carbon by 50%. The second is by cutting water by 30%. While creating and delivering a circular textiles roadmap for the UK. And we do this with a number of different organizations. These are roughly, we're about 140 at the moment, but we essentially convene all these different stakeholders together, and we help to support them to make these positive changes for their businesses towards climate-based targets and goals. And there are a number of different ways in which we do that. So we have a few different work streams. We have one around circular design. So we've been developing different types of resources, such as our circular design toolkit, along with our design recyclability workshops, and finally, our durability guidelines. And we are using these to drive improvements in the design of textiles and garments. We also have a workstream called Closing the Loop, and this is where we're essentially trying to scale the recycling of textiles and exploring what are the really key challenges of making that possible. We also have a policy working group, which is really sort of engaging on what is the policy we need, what is the EPR we need to be making this possible, and how to bring it about as a sector. And then lastly, circular business models, which is the one that I'm leading. We are developing a number of different tools and resources that help companies to implement circular business models, as well as developing new tools and methods such as our displacement rate reports, which we are launching very shortly, which helps you to measure CDMs. And when I say circular business models, in particular within the fashion and textile sector, these are the key models that we're really talking about. So firstly, repair. So this is essentially either enabling citizens to repair things themselves or enabling them to access professional repair services to extend the lifetime of their clothing. The next model is resale. So this is essentially allowing sort of the resale of pre-loved items. So this is either through own brand, who might recover their products through take back and resell it through their own channels, or it's any other kind of resale of pre-love. So that's either charity resale, that's peer-to-peer resale, that's independent online retailers who deal in the resale of pre-loved items. The next is rental, so access over ownership. People rent it for a short amount of time or access it through subscription services. And then lastly, upcycling. So this is where we might take garments that either can't be repaired or can't be sold, and they're disassembled and then remade into a new item, which then goes back onto the market. And so why do we need circular business models for the fashion sector? So the fashion sector roughly makes up about 8 to 10% of global emissions. It uses a huge amount of water, not only to grow the cotton, the different kind of materials we need to make the clothing. There's a huge amount of water used in the production, but also water used in the maintenance and the use phase of clothing as well. It's also a sector that's very wasteful. So around 100,000 tons of clothing is discarded in the UK annually, which is a vast amount of clothing that is discarded every year. But also in the UK, we buy more clothes per person than any other country in Europe. And this is increasing year on year. We're seeing that there is more product being placed on the market. There are more buying of clothing each year, which is really impacting our ability to improve and reduce those carbon and water targets that we're looking to get to. And so, the reason why CBM is important from our perspective, we've done some modeling using LCAs, and we know that CBMs, the implementation of CBMs, will help reduce these targets and reduce water and carbon. But we also know that CBMs really help to improve the productivity of existing stock that exists in the market. It really enables, brands and retailers to decouple their ability to grow, their ability to create profit from the production and the use of virgin resources. But also it helps to really shift behaviors and mindsets towards more circular living, not just for citizens, for consumers, but also for people engaging in the fashion and textile system, so that we can sort of move away from this sort of fast fashion, buy, consume, use, discard as quickly as possible, and move to something that is more circular. But there are a lot of key challenges for CBMs. We sort of, if it's good for the planet and, it's an easy way for people to access stuff, why aren't circular business models business as usual? And some of those key challenges that we're seeing, firstly, around some really strategic challenges. So often we're not using perhaps the right kind of KPIs for measuring CBMs. We often benchmark them against linear models, which is something that can be a problem when thinking about the success of circular business models. We're also seeing a bit of a lack of understanding of what the R&R sector, so that's recycling and reuse sector, how they operate. And so we need to have better collaboration from either end of the value chain so that we can sort of make this system work in a more circular way. We're also seeing that we don't think that perhaps circular business models are being designed in a sort of customer-centric way. We're trying to design the most circular business model without really understanding what it is that people really want out of a circular fashion system. And so a little bit more work can be done in that area. There are also a lot of financial challenges. So there's potentially a lot of lack of investment over time. So what we're seeing is there's been lots of pilots over the last 10 years, but we're not seeing those pilots then scaling and becoming sort of more scaled on the market offering. So we need to be thinking about how to stimulate investment for these longer term pilots around CBMs. We also need to be thinking about margins and pricing versus linear alternatives. Right now, sometimes for things like a t-shirt or a jumper, the cost of recovering that and repairing it and putting it back on the market is not often stacking up against the sort of linear alternatives. But hopefully we can hear from ACS who'll be able to answer some of those challenges that we're seeing as well. So environmental. While life cycle assessments are fantastic for measuring the environmental footprint of products, measuring the benefits of CBMs is a little bit more challenging. But we have a method called displacement, which is a great way of measuring that, and again is something that people need to be using more widely within the industry. We're also seeing a lot of those kind of operational challenges. So some companies have a kind of a low appetite for the testing or refinement of a business model. Again, you know, much like a linear offering, we can't expect to launch a circular business model into the market and then expect it to be perfect. We need to be testing, refining over time, be agile, and keep learning and changing the business model as we go until we get something that works. But we're also seeing is a lot of challenges around low quality clothing on the market for CBM. So we need highly durable stuff that can last multiple years across multiple users. And so we need to make sure that we're designing good stuff that people can use within CBMs. Because also the recycling reuse sector is sort of having a lot of challenges right now around a lot of high volumes of low quality stuff that they can't reuse in the secondhand market. And then lastly, there's some really interesting social challenges that we need to be thinking about. So such as sort of unintended consequences around things like the just transition. Do we know what are the benefits of CBMs? What are the challenges of CBMs from a kind of a workers and a perspective when we're implementing this in more detail? And also, what is the role of the charity sector within this space? The charity sector has been implementing CBMs for the last sort of 50 years. They've been really driving pre-loved within this country for a long time, and have a really key role to play in how we do that. So we need to making sure that we are building a new circular business model marketplace that is for everybody, for all stakeholders within our system. And so thinking about challenges, we also think there's lots of really exciting opportunities for how we can get these going. And firstly, there's some really cool stuff happening around citizens. So we know that the second-hand marketplace for clothing is growing and is predicted to continue to grow over the next 5 years. We're seeing that citizens are buying and selling more pre-loved, and lots of brands are taking notice and understanding how they can engage in that type of system. We also see that there is still a thriving charity and growing commercial online marketplace. So citizens are buying from charity shops, they're buying from online retailers, they're buying from own brand secondhand. And so there's lots of opportunities to lots of channels that consumers can be engaging with in order to grow this generally within the UK. But we're also seeing that from our citizen insight research that around a quarter of clothes in the UK aren't being worn in the last year. So there's lots of idle stock sat out in people's wardrobes that we need to be thinking about how we can get that out of people's wardrobes and back into circulation. And I think that's a really interesting and exciting service opportunity that we really need to be thinking about. So next, there's some really cool stuff happening around technology. So Generally, digitalization has made accessing of things like repair services much easier. So things like the Seam and Sojo, we now can have door-to-door repair services. We can take those items that perhaps don't fit us anymore and get them changed and again back into circulation. Also some really cool stuff around kind of CX and UX. I think some organizations are doing a really good job of thinking about how to make engagement with CBMs really interesting and exciting and easy for consumers, which is sort of really stimulating activity in that area. And then lastly, the social perspective. So this is a stat taken from a report by the Charity Retail Association about sort of the social benefit and the social value of resale for the market. And there's some really interesting things happening there. The social value of CBMs is something that isn't always considered and thought about. But as I said before, the charity sector has been doing resale for a long time. There are a lot of benefits for society if people can access used clothing at lower prices. But also we know there are lots of citizens that will only ever donate their clothing to charity rather than selling online. So there's always going to be a good supply for this sector and a lot of benefits that they can provide as well. And so in order to design circular business models, we have a guide that we have implemented. We launched a couple of years ago. I'm not going to go through this. I just want to pause very briefly on the business case, because for me, that's the really interesting, exciting thing that we need to be digging into more detail. And the way in which we are planning on doing this at the moment at WRAP in the next sort of year or so is to be thinking about this through these 4 different lenses. So firstly, really thinking about the desirability of an offering. So what do people really want out of a circular business model? What is their attitudes? What are their behaviors? What are their needs around this offering? Because it's great that we have a really good circular service, but we need to make sure that it's something that really meets a need for your customers. We then need to be thinking about the viability, so the financial modeling of how we make this work. We also need to be thinking about the feasibility. So what are the right kind of partnerships you need? What are the kind of technology enablers that really help you to mitigate some of those operational barriers that you might see in your reverse supply chain for your circular business model? And then lastly, how do we measure the environmental benefit of this business model? How do we know that it's better than our linear alternative? And I'm just going to briefly go across sort of 3 quick examples, which we think, or I think, essentially meet and speak to some of these 4 lenses. So firstly, the Little Loop. They are a secondhand marketplace for high quality kids clothing. Essentially, they started in rental. They found that was a bit of a challenge in terms of making that scale, making that really work. And they pivoted into pre-loved. And essentially, they've created a sort of tech-enabled platform that is easy and convenient for parents to use in order to access ethical brands and make it really, really easy for them to buy and trade in their kids' clothing. And the way in which they do that is that they have this sort of digital closet for all their purchases. So as soon as you buy something, it goes into your digital closet, but then makes it easy for then you to relist and send back into the Little Loop. But also for brands, this essentially creates a bit of an aggregated take-back scheme. So brands can then, their products are resold on the platform, which then they take a percentage of. So it's easy for brands, it's easy for consumers, and it's using tech in a really interesting and exciting way. The next example is the Charity Supermarket. So this is the UK's first and only multi-brand department store for all things within sort of charity fashion. And it was founded in order to really benefit, platform the benefits of charity resale and sort of challenge some of those notions that low quality clothing is the type of things that you'll find in charity shops. And they're doing this by accessing this through underutilized UK retail spaces and bringing sort of charity retail to the high street, which is sort of really interesting, exciting. And they've done this with a partnership across a number of charities. The benefit for the charities, this is enabling them to reach new types of spaces, new types of segments, new types of consumers, and have more reach in terms of what they're doing, and then really kind of platforming the charity sector more broadly across the UK. And then my last example is Nobody's Child. They've done a number of different things around circular economy. They've implemented circular design principles into a lot of their products. They offer repair services, a partnership with Sojo, and they've most recently launched a pre-loved offering. But what I wanted to highlight here is that they are a brand doing their own brand rental offering. And what I quite like about what they're doing here is they've integrated rental alongside purchasing. So you as a customer, you go in your journey, you're then given both options. You're not then taken off to a rental platform site, which then you would have to find, and you might not discover that if you're going through their normal channels of their website. But what I quite like about this is that they've again made it easy to access for customers, not changing that customer journey too much, and thinking more holistically across the entire sort of circular offering that they're doing. And so I'll stop there. These are just some links to a lot of the reports that I've mentioned. Again, I'm happy to circulate this, but you can find everything on our website, and you should be able to access this all through these QR codes, all through these links here. But thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Merryn. Really insightful presentation, and really great to see particularly some of the figures around circular business models, which are often missing so often from kind of the stories that we hear, and really great to hear some new case studies as well. So if anyone has any questions for Merryn, please do pop them in the chat or wait until the end, and then we'll come and take your question. So thank you very much again. And now going to hand over to Andrew.
Thanks very much, Fiona, and thanks, Merryn. Hello, everyone. My name's Andy Rough. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at Advanced Clothing Solutions. I'm just going to share my screen. And just check, can everyone see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay, I believe I've got about 15 minutes, so I'll hopefully be able to run through this on time. So what does Advanced Clothing Solutions do? We basically enable fashion brands and retailers the opportunity to offer their customers circular fashion solutions. And we've been doing this since 1997. I'd probably argue that we were a circular business before anyone was really talking about circular fashion solutions or talking about circularity. We started off as a menswear rental business. We bought inventory, we rented it to retailers who then rented it to the end user of that item, predominantly servicing weddings and black tie events. And we provided a white label menswear service, and we provided it to many UK retailers like Debenhams, Burton's, Greenwood's Menswear, Slater's Menswear, T.M. Lewin, Austin Reed, lots of retailers that used to be really dominant on the high street, but sadly are no longer with us. And we as a company have therefore had to change the way that we operate, the way we offer circular fashion solutions. And what are our key objectives? Basically, as I mentioned, we allow brands and retailers the opportunity to gain access to new markets and new customers. We generate revenue from resale, rental, repair, and upcycling. So a lot of the points that Merryn covered, we actually do in practice. I don't know if you noticed, but on the affiliates, ACS is mentioned there. The Nobody's Child rental offering, that's actually provided by ACS, and I'll cover that in due course. But fundamentally, what we're doing is maximizing the life cycle of apparel and footwear. We want people to enjoy fashion. We all fundamentally like putting on clothing. It makes us feel better about ourselves. But we don't want to feel guilty about that. And what we're trying to do is allow fashion brands and retailers to interact differently with their customers. To give you a sense of scale, we process about 6 million clothing items a year, and we're the UK's largest circular fashion hub. We have about 200,000 square foot facility, and a lot of the brands that are on the high street that offer resale and rental are all powered by ACS behind the scenes. Merryn talked a lot about technology. Technology has a key play, but also it comes down to actually what do you do with apparel items and what do you do with footwear items? And I'll touch on that in due course as well. But at our facility, we enable storage, we sanitize items, we repair them, we fulfill orders, we clean clothing, and we handle returns. We're proud to say that we're members of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and we also are a B Corp. And why does circularity matter? Well, it matters because of consumer behavior. It was touched on in the previous presentation. 70% of consumers are willing to buy secondhand items. If you look at the growth of the secondhand pre-loved market, it is growing substantially. If you look at the traditional linear model, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation estimate that 30% of clothes manufactured are never actually worn, and that was touched on the previous presentation as well. If you think about that linear model, why would you manufacture 30% of items and they're never actually worn? It just doesn't make sense. And hence why you've got to drive and change a business in the way it operates to be more circular. But the biggest challenge with that is that you're trying to demonstrate to a brand or retailer that they need to adopt different aspects of how they operate as a business and how they interact with their customer. And we enable circular economy. We offer renewal, repair, rental, resale, and remake, or as Merryn called it, upcycling. And we do it at scale. And it gives you an idea of who our partners are here. We work with Moss Hire, so someone going into a Moss store in the UK, renting something for a wedding or a black tie, it's actually fulfilled by ACS. The All Saints rental subscription service is carried out by ACS. Timberland resale, Vans resale, LK Bennett subscription. We work with Hardly Ever Worn It, which is a secondhand marketplace, and we basically power the whole of North Face Renewed in the UK, and we're also starting to do that for Go Outdoors, and we also basically power the Nudie Jeans resale and warranty repair aspect in the UK. And there's many more brands and retailers that we interact with. But the key thing of being able to do this is to demonstrate that the unit economics work, and that was touched on in the previous presentation. A circular fashion solution will not be sustainable, it will not be long-term if you can't generate profits out of it. Yes, there's a sustainable aspect to it, and that's incredibly important, but fundamentally, we've got to demonstrate as a business, ACS, that we can make our customers more profitable. And we believe strongly that we can by demonstrating to them that circular fashion solutions will be more profitable and more asset utilization than traditional linear models. To me, rental and resale are very similar. It's moving away that concept from ownership of fashion items to having access to fashion items. And the difference between rental and resale is just that you have them for a longer period of time. If you think about it, you rent a seat on a plane when you're going on holiday, you rent it for that journey. But if you rent a car, you just rent it for a longer period of time. Rental and resale is just giving you access to clothing that you wouldn't necessarily get access to under the traditional buying and owning an item. I strongly believe that the fashion sector will have a mixture of different ways of interacting with their consumers. Yes, people will always want to own items, but if you can attract new customers by allowing them to come in at a price point which is lower than full price, i.e. resale, or if you can get them access to clothing on a more regular basis through rental, then that will attract new customers to your brand. One of our brands that offers resale or pre-loved or secondhand or whatever we're calling it today, estimate that 50% of the customers that go to their resale program are brand new customers to that brand. And of that 50% convert to full price customers. One of the concerns we often hear from brands and retailers who we're trying to interact with is that their concern is that resale or rental will cannibalize their full price product. We can demonstrate to them that that's not the case. And it's all about education, which was touched on again in the previous presentation, because we're fundamentally trying to indicate that a brand and retailer needs to change the way that they've operated for many years. So what does ACS do? We do resale, we do rental, and we do repair, and we do remake or upcycling. And the magnitude of the potential opportunity here is vast. If you think about the UK sector, ACS is perfectly positioned to provide lots of circular solutions. The largest rental company in the world is Rent the Runway, based in the US. And the largest resale company is based in the US, called FredUp. FredUp purely focuses on resale. Rent the Runway focuses purely on rental. ACS, just by its very nature of being in the UK, have had to adopt a variety of different circular fashion solutions because the geography or the size of the country that we live in requires us to be as much as adaptable as possible to provide as many circular offerings to brands and retailers as possible. So the growth in the second-hand market, we touched on it. If you think about the growth in the second-hand market, it's being driven by platforms. It's being driven by technology platforms. It's being driven by the likes of Exeter Collective, eBay, Depop, and Vinted. All these platforms are growing fastly, quickly, significantly, and they're generating huge amount of money for them and their shareholders. But if you think about it, the brands aren't driving that change. The brands are missing out on all this secondary income. If you think about if I sold a piece of clothing to someone else on Vinted, the brand isn't part of that transaction. The brand has no control over how that clothing item is sold, how it's displayed, or how it's presented to the next user of that item. So the brand is losing control of itself. It's losing control of its branded items. And as I say, it's not part of that transaction. So what we're doing at ACS is we're trying to assist brands to be part of this growth. The growth in the second-hand clothing market is significant, and the fashion brands and retailers are missing out on it. The smart ones are getting involved in it, and a lot of them are creating their own branded resale platforms. If you look at the North Face, who we power, they've created their own remade pre-loved resale program on their the North Face normal retail platform. There's just a button called resale. You click on it and you can buy pre-loved North Face items at a lower price than the full price items. So they've committed to creating their own marketplace. But lots of other brands don't necessarily want to make that investment. You don't want to make that big step. So what we're able to do at ACS is we're able to support them to be able to promote their product on all these platforms like eBay, Depop, Vinted, Exeter Collective, because that's creating a huge shopping marketplace for them. The amount of money they would have to spend to get that real estate, to get that opportunity to be able to promote their product to all these new customers would be significant. So what is behind the scenes of the technology? We talk a lot about technology, but actually the technology is only part of the equation. What you've got to do is that you've got to receive and you've got to sort out the inventory that you receive from the brand. You then sanitize that item. Every clothing item that we receive at this facility, we sanitize and removes the odor. The biggest barrier to secondhand clothing and pre-loved clothing or rental clothing is the perception that you're wearing something dirty or something smelly. What we're able to do is to remove that myth by sanitizing the garments. And I would strongly argue that by buying something that's been sanitized is a lot cleaner than something that you would pick up in a shop or buy online, because there's no guarantee that it will be sanitized, and you've got no guarantee who previously wore that item. I remember I had a classic conversation with one brand who said, "Oh, I don't think our customers would want to wear second-hand clothing items." I said, "Why not?" And they said, "Well, it's touching skin." I said, "Well, that's interesting. Have you ever stayed in a hotel?" And they went, "Yes." And I said, "Well, did you know who had slept in the bed the night before you? You've had your sheets cleaned, but you don't seem to have an objection about that. Do you ever stay in Airbnb?" So it's moving that principle. It's trying to break the myth. After sanitization, we photograph items, because it's very, very important to present how the item is. If it's a second-hand item, if there's a tear or a rip in the garment and it's been repaired, you need to inform the next user of the item. And then what we're able to do at ACS is that we're able to cross-list on multiple marketplaces. So we can simultaneously list clothing items over eBay and Depop, for example, and that gives the brands that we support the opportunity to reach out to lots of different customers, because what we've found is that certain marketplaces have certain types of customers, and there's a lot of customer loyalty to marketplaces. We then put away and store the item, and then when it's been ordered online, we then fulfill the item. So the technology is a critical, important part, but so is the actual getting the clothing item, cleaning it, repairing it, sanitizing it, photographing it, and getting it ready for the next user of that item. So what we're doing at ACS is really pushing the boundaries. And as noted, we are members of RAP, Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and we're certified B Corp, we're carbon neutral, and we're really proud of what we've done. If you think about what we are, we're basically a large laundry unit. We use chemicals, we use water, and we use a lot of energy. What we're constantly trying to do is to reduce the amount of energy and water that we use and chemicals, to make sure that we are as truly sustainable as possible. And when we became a B Corp, we had the 6th highest score in the UK. And I think that's a credible achievement for what is, in some contexts, is a large laundry unit. So I'd like to say and sort of summarize that to make this work, you've got to show that the unit economics work. And it's really important when talking to brands and retailers that we can demonstrate to them that circular fashion solutions are more profitable than the traditional linear models that they follow. We were a rental company. I would say that a rental company and a rental offering is quite difficult for many CFOs and CEOs to understand, because you're talking about buying inventory but holding on to it, and holding it on and talking about asset utilization, and talking to them about, well, after this point in time, it will become more profitable. Resale and the growth of pre-loved is a more easier sale to brands, because you are solving a problem that they have at the moment, which is returns. The level of returns is substantial. There's a lot of inventory sitting in warehouses all over the UK that is earning no money for brands and retailers. And being able to demonstrate to the brands and retailers that they can basically make money out of what has traditionally been a waste stream is a really, really important way of getting brands and retailers into the way of thinking about circular fashion solutions. I strongly believe that is one of the first steps to get them into circular business models, and then taking them to the next step of rental. And rental is a mixture of one-off rental and subscription rental. I'm currently wearing an All Saints shirt. I build a virtual wardrobe. I pay £79 a month, and I receive items from the virtual wardrobe that I build. As soon as I return an item, I automatically get sent another item from the virtual wardrobe that I built. So that's giving me a revolving wardrobe. In a society where we've had a tendency to buy and own items, this is allowing me to get access to more fashionable items and on a more regular basis. So I suppose what I'm trying to demonstrate is that there's the practicalities of this, and hopefully that's been covered in this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's really inspirational to see the comprehensive approach that you're taking, and also at such scale, because we hear about a lot of these stories happening in very niche areas, but what you're doing with so many kind of brands that we recognise is really fantastic. So we've had quite a few questions in the chat. So I am going to go to Jessica first, who has asked a question, I think, for Merryn. So Jessica said she would like to know more about how you calculated the percentage reduction of carbon and water footprints when CBMs are used.
Yes, I have so I don't know the specifics of how the metrics team have done their calculations, but essentially we using LCA database, using EcoInvent in order to make those calculations, as well as some data that we collected ourselves through our network to ensure the rigor of that data and to make sure that it's most accurate. I shared it to Jessica directly, but I'll share it into the chat as well, that we've got the footprint tool itself has its methodology. It's something that is, again, open source that you can have a look at and potentially use in order to understand your own environmental calculations. If anyone has any specific questions around that, I can always direct you to our metrics team who can dig more into that.
Brilliant, thank you. And then we have a question from Lars, who is saying that it's great to see you making it easy for people to access circular options as part of the same customer journey. And I really like that in both of your examples of where, buying and also renting or signing up to a subscription was done under the same kind of customer journey to make it super easy. Lars asked, can we get the luxury brands on board who slash their wares to keep prices up? The biggest challenge to crack hand in hand with de-impacting fashion would be how to make it uncool to overconsume in the first place. Yeah, I guess either of you, both of you.
Sure, no, absolutely, totally agree. I mean, there are movements and drive and hopefully EPR that should make it you're not allowed to damage or burn dead stock. That is the kind of thing that we absolutely must be avoiding at all costs, because there is inherent value in that item. I think how to make it uncool to overconsume, that's where we need to be doing more citizen engagement and really understand, why are we consuming so much stuff? Why does the UK buy more stuff than other nations in Europe? What is it about the framing of fashion to people that we do this? And we try to do we try to do as much citizen insights as we can to understand how these are changing year on year. But we also need to be thinking about, what are the different kind of interventions we can be designing into customer journeys. I think education can take us so far, but I think, brands need to be taking their consumers with them on this journey towards circular business models and thinking about how they market their products, the linear products and the circular products together.
And interesting thinking about how we get luxury brands on board. And Andrew, you've got a number of brands that, I don't know whether they'd call themselves luxury, but they're certainly at the kind of high end of fashion. All Saints, for example, sell at higher prices. How do you respond to that question about kind of, luxury brands and the difference between those and more high street?
Well, one of the quickest growing marketplaces is Vesta Collective. It's got a huge valuation now, and it is a marketplace for luxury brands. So clearly there is an appetite from individuals to buy secondhand luxury items. One of the growth areas for eBay is luxury items, where you can buy, if you want to choose, a Hermes handbag. And so therefore there is clearly a demand. So the brands really need to think about being part of that journey. I think it'll come down to them realizing that they're missing out on a great opportunity. Some brands are fueling luxury take-back schemes. There's a lot of that going on in handbags. It's quite small, but it's definitely increasing. And I think they've seen the growth. The other thing is that they'll want to control authenticity. And there's a huge amount of fraudulent items out there. The brands are really nervous about that. So if they have more control over the second-hand market, then they'll be able to limit that. So therefore, they will be able to attract new customers. They'll be able to be profitable with take-back items, and they'll be able to control the authenticity of those items. So I do feel that it will just naturally happen anyway, but it also will happen with legislation. And fundamentally, we've got to be really honest with ourselves that brands and luxury items will only do it if they think they can make money out of it. And at the moment, they're missing out on a great opportunity. And some luxury brands are realizing that they can be part of the equation.
Yeah, really, really good points. Nellie's asked a question. Great to see you, Nellie. Can either or both of you talk about how you can encourage customers to care for garments that they've rented so that they come back in good shape?
Do you want me to touch? Oh, sorry, I was going to touch on
I was going to say, Andrew, because I guess I don't know. Is that something that you're seeing in rented items that come back through your network?
To be honest, the majority of items that we receive back are actually in really good condition. People often ask us, because we provide services for some baby rental companies like Bundley, which is the largest rental baby wear company in the UK. And a lot of people said, "Oh, what's the condition of the baby wear items that you get back?" Usually we find out that they're in really, really good condition. Probably the worst condition of items that we get back is normal menswear suits that they've worn to a wedding or a black tie event and feel that they can probably do a bit of John Travolta on the dance floor and spill red wine and food all over themselves. And we've had sporrans returned with prawns in them, peas within them, wedding rings, passports, wedding certificates, you name it, we've had it back. But we're able to demonstrate that we can clean and repair the items and get them ready for the next user. The only thing that we struggle with is cigarette burns and also fashionable items, because ultimately people won't rent something that is not in fashion.
And are there any penalties, Andrew, for things that are returned in a bad condition?
Yeah, so ultimately, in a situation where we are renting something to a retailer and the retailer is renting it to the end user, if the end user returns it to a store and it's in a bad condition, then the retailer's interaction is with that individual and they should pay a penalty for that, because ultimately we will charge the retailer for returning an item that is not in good condition.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really interesting point, Fiona, because if any of us rent a car and we return that car back and it's got a huge dent in the side of it, we don't expect not to have to pay for it.
That's what I was thinking. So it's almost kind of building in that behavior. If you're renting something, you should expect to have to look after it.
Yeah.
And I think it's also highly dependent on the product category and how it's being used and how long it's being rented for, and just being, I guess, aware of what those behaviors and actions might be. As Andrew said, things that go to weddings often get a little out of control. So perhaps people don't take care of the things quite as well. But if you're renting, say, ski wear and you're going out, you're less likely to sort of damage it in that kind of environment. So it's just kind of being mindful of what is that journey and what are the sort of messaging or interventions you could make with that customer to ensure that they are taking care of it.
And also, I suppose, whether you could build up a profile. So, on Vinted, if you're a good seller and you post on time and that sort of thing, maybe, something similar could be applied if you're engaging with a subscription model or a rental model, that you build up that profile or points.
Yeah, interesting.
I've got a couple of questions related to kind of the international element. So Lisbeth is asking, I think this is primarily for Andrew, do you engage with any traders in the Global South? And then later, Karina has asked, she's from Peru, and she really hopes that soon we can get something similar. She has asked Andrew if you could talk a bit about how ACS started.
Sorry, Fiona, what was the first question in the
So whether you engage with any traders in the global south,
in the
and
global
if you have any plans to expand, I suppose, outside of Europe.
We would love to expand out with the UK and Europe. It all comes down to demand and building a case study for our investors to support us with expansion. I would say that the UK is significantly advanced in sustainable fashion, and we talk about it a lot. There is a demand for it by customers, but the big resale programs are all in the US, and the likes of the North Face resale program, the Lululemon resale program, or New Balance. So you've got three really big brands there that are offering resale programs. It will be a matter of time before they come to the UK and Europe, and that helps organizations like ACS to be able to have a case study to expand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. And just building on that, I was wondering, for both of you, kind of, is there a disconnect between those primary producers? So, you know, the mass amount of textiles that's being produced in Asia and China, and then the retailers and the retailers, kind of resale repair that's happening kind of more locally. And how do the two communicate? I'm just thinking about how we incentivize producers to design and manufacture kind of more durable products that lend themselves to rental, reuse, repair.
I can speak to that a little bit. So, I mean, what we're hearing from a lot of our organizations in our network is that they want durability guidelines. They want to make good stuff generally. The durability standards that are being currently developed in the network that hopefully should be launched in the next few months will outline some of the ways in which brands and retailers want to do that. A lot of the brands and retailers in our network want to be held accountable. You know, they don't make stuff to pollute the world. They want to make good products. But in terms of sort of connecting that supply chain, it is really challenging because we don't have a lot of UK-based recycling. So a lot of it is exported. And then when it's exported, it gets a little bit out of control in terms of where it goes. A lot of the Closing the Loop work stream is trying to engage with lots of different organizations in order to ensure that we are exporting the right types of clothing to the right types of markets, because there's still a great opportunity there. But we also have to make sure that we're not sending our clothing to spaces that don't need or want them, because that's when bad practices happen, such as dumping and burning and that kind of stuff. It is difficult to connect the supply chain across these nations. And ideally, what we're trying to do with things like the voluntary agreement is convene a lot of these people in the room so that we can have these discussions. But there's still, unfortunately, there's still a long way to go. Don't know, Andrew, if you've got anything to add there.
Yeah, I would just mirror what you've said there. I think that there's a hell of a long way to go. We had a practical solution where we were working with a brand on pre-loved items, and we identified a common fault in one of their clothing items that they sent to us, which they weren't aware of, and they were able to then go back to their supply chain to get improvement in the manufacture of that item. So that was a byproduct of a circular solution, actually going back into the linear model and saying how you're manufacturing this at the moment creates a problem further up the chain. Recycling is a really, really complex area. The issue that we have as a global place is that, like it or not, the majority of manufacturing of apparel and footwear takes place in the Far East. A lot of the recycling initiatives are sort of in the West. And so you're getting items that are being sent for recycling in the West, and then you have to then ship them back to the Far East to get back into the supply chain. There's a total disconnect there. It just doesn't work. And I do find it quite interesting where, being completely candid, we have a lot of brands that come to us and say, oh, ACS, it'd be great if you could start recycling products as well. I think they completely underestimate the amount of investment required to set up a proper recycling facility that is able to break down different fibers. Because if you think about a normal clothing item, it's very few that are 100% of one type of fiber. So actually breaking it down into different aspects is incredibly complicated. And I think there is a huge mismatch between what people think can be achieved with what actually can be achieved in practice at the current place that we're in.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that touches on that kind of consumer education piece around, recycling is always the answer. It's easy, just throw it in a bin and never see it again. But actually the infrastructure and the operations behind that is huge. And we're definitely not there yet. And this touches on, you've partly answered Monica's question, which was about, she suggested in Sweden, there was recently headlines that the second-hand or circular business operators don't want to circulate garments simply due to the very poor quality and the amount of toxic chemicals in the fabric. So how could we influence and incentivize fashion producers to design more responsibly? So I guess this is generally, how do we design more sustainable clothing in the first place, whatever its end use, to use kind of less chemicals, less toxic contaminants.
No, absolutely. And that would really help to decarbonize the supply chain as well. There's, again, like 70% of the garments footprint is in the manufacture. No, wait. 70% of the carbon emissions is in the supply chain. Apologies, not in the garment itself. And so we need to be doing better practices within the manufacturing of items. And that's what we're trying to do with circular design. And lots of brands are learning how to do it. Lots of brands are doing it as well. But we need a few years to get those products onto the market. Because right now they're hopefully still in people's wardrobes. And so we're sort of waiting for a bit of a lag for some of that stuff to come back into the second market so that we can start recirculating it.
Yeah, fantastic. There are a few more questions. I'm conscious that we are out of time. It's 5 o'clock. I might just ask one final question. I have just put the link to the Exeter Centre for the Circular Economy in the chat, and also the Future Fibres Network, because there's lots going on kind of globally, nationally, lots of case studies that we've got on both of those sites, and also particularly the Future Fibres Network is a network to engage, so lots of activities that you can get involved with and experts that you can tap into, so please visit those. I think I'll just end on a question from Jessica, and it's really about your business model, Andrew. So Jessica asked, please can you clarify how you receive second-hand clothes before you repair, remake or sanitize them? So she's a bit confused about whether it comes directly from the retailers or the customers, or is it a bit of both?
It's a bit of both, and we don't actually know what we're receiving. So it's actually a case of us receiving inventory in very basic terms, and receiving boxes of inventory on pallets, opening up those boxes, inspecting the items, and then grading them, and then deciding which route that those clothing items can go on, whether we can clean them, repair them, and also, more importantly, whether it's worthwhile doing that exercise, because it comes back to the unit economics, and we touched on it in earlier. Realistically, if you're selling a t-shirt for £8, if you take VAT off that, if you take the shipping off that, then there's really not very much that is available left for actually doing it. So sadly, in those situations, it's really a garment that you can't touch. But I don't want to end the conversation on negative. There is so much opportunity for garments that are sitting in DCs, not earning any value at all for their owners, which have huge economic value in the second-hand market. And it's working with the right brands and being able to demonstrate to them that there is a viable solution, which has traditionally been a waste stream, and touching on Merryn's point, has ended up in situations where you lose control of that item and it frankly gets dumped. And that is a shocking reality of where we've been, but we need to change that.
Yeah, thank you. Sinead, for any final words from you, Merryn?
No, I just want to say it's been great to sort of present to everybody here around circular business models. We know that circular business models can really help to drive and change activity, and we really need more circular business models to decouple, revenue and profit from the use of virgin resources. So if there are any brands in the room, I would say come and talk to us about circular business models. We're here to support you to do that kind of thing, and really start thinking about how to implement that within your business.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you ever so much, both. I think we're all very aware that there's huge challenges that we're still facing in fashion and textile sector. However, I think what I've taken from both of your presentations is that there is a lot to be optimistic about. It's fantastic to see the figures associated with the reuse market and loads of brands that are actually doing some really exciting stuff, facilitated by organisations such as RAP and ACS, which is really brilliant. So thank you so much for presenting, but also the fantastic work that you're doing. And thank you also to our audience, some really great questions. Please do carry on engaging with us on this topic and more generally around the circular economy. As I said, this webinar is one of a series of webinars that we run frequently. So if you haven't already, please visit the Exeter Centre for the Circular Economy website and sign up to our newsletter, where we will put out kind of notification of these types of webinars, but also all of the other activities and case studies that we're involved with. So thank you very much. I hope you all have a great rest of the day, evening, and look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.